Hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning in and for taking the time to listen and evaluate our students. This video is going to be brief, but an introduction into how we can better evaluate our medical students by exploring our own biases. Bias in medical student evaluations is something that's becoming increasingly scrutinized over the last few years. Part of that has to do with the fact that numeric metrics for our students are going away, with step one being pass fail and class rank becoming less of a factor for many students. And part of it is because we're doing a better job at exploring the landscape of medical school and how we evaluate students of different races and genders. And so this session is meant to give you an introduction into some of those concepts and how we can better evaluate our students. Part of the problem across the system is that when we look at student evaluations, the written feedback that we give students, there's a lot of bias in the way we evaluate our students, and there's low inter-rater reliability. What that means is that any given attending or resident might evaluate a student differently based on the experience that they had with that student. Some of that is just the reality that different people will have different experiences working with that student. But also part of that is that every evaluator brings their own biases to the table and their own experiences, and that affects how they evaluate the students. So there's been a lot of studies that have looked at this across medicine. I'm just going to give you a few brief examples. This study looked at bias as related to race. So they examined the MSPEs, the Medical Student Performance Evaluations, for 6,000 medical students across the country. This was done in 2014, 2015. And they found that there was a statistically significant difference in the adjectives used to describe students of different races. What they found was that if a student was Black, they were significantly more likely to be called competent, as opposed to white students who are more likely to be called exceptional or best, even when controlling for board scores in this study. There's also been bias displayed in terms of gender. So there's been a lot of studies that have looked at this as well. This is just an example of some of them. There was a meta-analysis that looked at bias related to women applicants for different residency positions and letters of recommendation. And what they found was that women applicants were significantly more likely to be described using communal adjectives, as opposed to men who are more likely to be described using agentic adjectives. Communal adjectives are words that highlight a person's interpersonal skills or community building skills. Words like delightful, compassionate, kind, as opposed to agentic adjectives that demonstrate a person's leadership skills, clinical capabilities. Words like exceptional, successful, leader. Reference letters for women are also more likely to have doubt raisers and mention their personal life. And there's been at least one study that showed that this disadvantages women in application processes. Now, this issue of bias is not unique to medicine. A lot of these studies have been replicated in different fields, from academia, STEM fields in general, the music industry. So this is not a problem exclusive to us, but we definitely can work towards a solution and improve the way that we evaluate our students. So what are some ways that we can do better? Part of it is just taking your time. That's why we give you this dedicated space to evaluate our students, and why we have this video for you today. Take your time, put in thoughtful feedback, and really reflect on what you are trying to say about the student. Are you trying to convey that they were excellent, that they were top of their class? Are you trying to convey that they were just an average student? And reflecting on your intention with that can really make the evaluation more meaningful. The other piece is being aware of your own biases. I encourage you all, as you're evaluating your students, to think about their race and gender and ethnic background, but also your own, and how that might affect the way that you're evaluating the student, what biases you're bringing to the table. There's this practice called checking your biases, which can be helpful, which is thinking about, if the student were of a different race or gender, would I be evaluating them differently? And making sure you're considering that as you break down your evaluations. Some other things that I encourage you to do is think about narratives. Writing stories can be really powerful, and I'll give you some examples of that in the upcoming slides. But in reflecting on what you're trying to say, what the overall purpose and goal of your evaluation for the student is, think about the traits that student has that you're trying to highlight. Some traits that you can highlight in an evaluation for a medical student include their personality and communication skills, their teamwork skills, and their medical knowledge. And think about, is there an area that you want to focus on? Do you want to highlight all three areas? Do you want to highlight one or two areas? And think about the examples that you give of their behavior and how that highlights the skills that they have in that area. So, for example, if you think that the student was a really great communicator, you could talk about their bedside manner, their rapport building. If you think they were really smart, you can talk about how well they understood clinical scenarios, the presentations they give, the research they did on rare drug complication and things of that nature. And then pay attention to the adjectives you're using. Adjectives can convey a different meaning depending on the reader. And sometimes we use adjectives a lot that we think are positive, which aren't necessarily negative, but may not convey what you're trying to convey. For example, adjectives that convey excellence would be things like top-notch, leader, role model, superior, one of the best students I've worked with. For medical students, adjectives that convey that they're about average are things like intelligent, productive, knowledgeable. Again, not bad adjectives, but things that don't convey excellence. And then doubt raisers are things like competent, acceptable, or saying that their skills were not observed. Lastly, when it comes to women medical students, I encourage you to think about these communal adjectives and how often you're using them. So, as we discussed earlier, women tend to be described a lot more with communal adjectives, adjectives that focus on their community building skills. I'm not saying you can never use these adjectives, but reflect on how often you're describing your women students as caring, compassionate, hardworking, as opposed to using words like excellent, outstanding, knowledgeable, which highlight more their clinical capabilities rather than their interpersonal skills. And remember that stories are powerful. Using them can really make an evaluation stronger. So instead of saying a student is caring and compassionate, you might give an example saying that they communicated with family on a regular basis, received great feedback. Instead of saying a student is smart, you can give an example of a rare drug complication that they researched or how they uncovered something that the team didn't see on first glance. Instead of saying a student is detail oriented, you can give an example of how they noticed a medication interaction that nobody else picked up on. These are just examples, but remember that stories can be a powerful way to communicate a message. That's all I have for you today. Thank you for listening and taking the time to evaluate our students, and I will put up my references in case anybody's interested in reading more. Thank you.